starting the recording. So the Good Practice Guide is intended to provide simple and practical advice about how we can really recognise and correctly communicate about small-scale fisher folk and their communities and organisations, their concerns and solutions. We know they often get overlooked. And so we're going to dig into that today. I'll share the link to the guide in a moment if you haven't already seen it. But just wanted to get started. We've got an hour together and we've got a series of questions to get through. So the first one that I wanted to put to our panel of Vivienne, Tero and Venu is, why are ethical and inclusive small-scale fisheries important? And what's at risk if we fail at this? So Vivienne, can you start for us?
Yes, well, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here, and I see a lot of people that have a lot of knowledge on the talk that we're going to have today. So I would like to invite them all to be part of this panel and be able also to share ideas and thoughts with us. I think this with of communication is very, very important because it has to have an objective. And now from our side, we have been working with the small-scale fisher and coastal communities for the last 25 years. The objective is to support the human rights-based approach to conservation and development. And this is important because we are not working in an open planet. We have a framework, and we have a rights framework. That means that people should have a common base of human rights that are being applied, that are being implemented in their livelihoods. And we have seen in the past in Latin America and Caribbean that small-scale fishers are third-level planet people. You know, they have not in some countries reached the rights that need to be provided to everyone. In a country like Costa Rica, for example, small-scale fishers are the ones that in some cases do not have potable water or do not approach a fair market. And these are issues that other sectors are having. So communication is important because it needs to have an objective and it needs to have one and the other answering. It has to be a two-way road. So in this sense, I believe that an ethical and inclusive ICSF communication has to show the big diversity of small-scale fishers, the very dynamic system. That means that it should show and speak about the whole value chains of fisheries, indigenous peoples, local communities, Afro-descendant communities, women and youth. It is a way of life. It is not only an economic activity. It's linked to a very diverse system in the territory. So I think that's the communication that we should provide, and it should come back with an answer. What's the risk if we don't do this? I think we are seeing what happens when we do not communicate well. And the planet is now suffering a very inequitable conservation system that we need to rethink how we are going to keep going in the future. Thank you, Kate.
Thanks, Vivienne. Over to Tero. Do you want to give us your thoughts on why are ethical and inclusive small-scale fisheries communications important?
Dear participants, good evening, and apologies for having a horrible flu. Luckily, it's not COVID. I greet you from the Boreal Forest of Selkia in Finland, where Snowchange, the organization that I'm currently chairing, is conducting our small-scale commercial fishery. And in some ways, this is one of the few things that really connects the global south with the small-scale fishers also in the global north. Most of us are highly marginalized. Most of us are dependent on really sustainable harvests, but have to compete in the open markets against, for example, Norwegian salmon. And in the case of the Arctic and Boreal, where our fishery happens, we have a kind of a bonus, which I sometimes name, which is the runaway impacts of climate change And this is to do with the fact that so much of our fishery is ice dependent. And not many people always realize that we are actually fishing on the ice, and the quality of ice, safe arrival, and dependency on when the ice conditions are safe for the harvests is instrumental for our small-scale fishery. Now, let's focus on the communications. 99% of the population in Finland, I would argue, knows nothing or very little of the actual harvests that happen today. I'm leading a fishing unit that dates back historical records 700 years to the past. In our region, we have the world's oldest net finding. 10,000 years ago, the Andrea net finding. So we have been at it for a while. However, the most important thing that has to do with these communications in conclusion is that we have to make invisible practices and reality visible. And that's why the only way to do that in today's world with all the multiple crises is good communications, but it should be authored together with the communities. And therefore I would throw into the mix the concept of free, prior, and informed consent. That is extremely important when you are working with communications and fishing communities. Thank you.
Thanks. Venu?
Yeah, I am from International Collective in Support of Fishworkers. I'm speaking from a very different side of the archive. I am speaking more from the normative side of their questions. So what strikes me this question is that under what conditions something new is produced is always very important. We have to look at institutions who are working in fisheries and their information policies. ICSF practices a communication which follows, publish, disseminate, make it available in the public domain, free and open access. ICSF understands that information created through monitoring and research, education and training, campaign and action, and communication is created with the use of public funds. All ICSF publications and films, including photographs, provide durable access over time. The daily global Samudra news alerts and the South Asia news alerts we started from 2002 and 2008, respectively, and last 2 years through social media, Twitter and Facebook, we provide support to fishworkers world over. ICSF is interested in multiplying channels of information, provide fishwork organizations the ability to listen to the unknown. This is basically like our job is like a cartographer to survey unknown landscapes and provide the fishworkers. We are a support organization, we don't represent fishwork organizations. ICSF, the aim of ICSF communication program is to desacralize what is sacralized. Whether it is an MPA or a craft gear conflict or a situation of migrant fishworkers working on board fishing vessels, or the invisible and marginalized voice of fishers, which includes women. Through Samudra report, we started from 1988, and YMEA Women in Fisheries newsletter from 1999, and through alerts on a daily basis. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next question I want to ask is, what are some problematic small-scale fisheries messages that need to be corrected? Vivienne?
Yes, Kate, thank you very much. This is a very interesting question, a little tricky, because if you permit, I would like to go around the question, because I think there's nothing like an SSF message that is incorrect if it's coming from a small-scale fisher or fisherwoman. But there are a lot of problems with the concepts we from the outside, from the technical, from the scientific, from the political field, are throwing into the general discussion, into the table of discussion of conservation and development that needs to take into consideration small-scale fisheries messages. These concepts are, for example, blue economy, are the 30x30 coalition, marine protected areas, other ways of area-based conservation measures. These concepts have not considered the impacts that are going to have on small-scale fisheries. So the question is interesting because I think all small-scale messages, fishing messages coming from these organizations or fishers are correct. The problem here is that we really need to think how communication is really fluent between the two areas, one coming from the technical, political, scientific world, and the other coming from the fishers. So we do need to have a very positive narrative. I think responsible stewardship that guarantees the defense of their own livelihoods is a key element when we are talking about the message that should be done, should be correct. And the idea that if conservation and development take into account the SSF messages, then we would have an enormous potential. The problem is that that other road to communication is not really coming with the same strength. Thank you.
Tero, and then Venu.
This is a very good question. I think we can look at this in a kind of, to use a fancy word, stratified or layered. There's the public, no matter where we are, they think all fisheries are this or that. Then you have the certification industry, for example, the Marine Stewardship Council and others that cost a huge amount of money, and in the global south and parts of the south, and here in the north they are used. And then finally, we have so I have been fishing for 45 years. I started when I was with my father in our fish cabin in a small lake in the Boreal. And in that 45 years, what we can summarize for the freshwater harvests we have is that there's a complete loss and collapse of ecological knowledge. So people don't know what is a good fish anymore. They don't know what is sustainable. And in the answer to this question, SSF fisheries are lumped in together with trawling fleets and farmed fish. I would go towards the pathway that we have done in some ways, which is to specialize, get an indicator for your fish and way of fishing, some protection, special markets, or other markers, UNESCO heritage or something that will make it known publicly how specific and special your fishery is. So the main problem in this question is that we are lumped in together with practices which are destroying the oceans, destroying the lakes, and yet we are probably the ones that are the river guardians, lake guardians, coastal guardians, and often our SSF fleets are family businesses. My wife is involved. I have trained young fishers, including young women now to the trade. What can we do to withstand the avalanche of information that doesn't pay attention to SSF? Only by creating specialized, clear messaging, things will change.
Can I say? Yeah. They are problematic because we don't consider the fishing communities as holders of information, and we don't recognize their social capital. We don't recognize their traditional knowledge systems. And one example I can suggest to you is that ICSF has a chance to publish a book called Ice on Their Fingertips, which is available online, which you could read to understand that the knowledge transmission model of small-scale fisheries is different from other natural resource groups, people. Generation to generation, socially appropriate governance mechanisms. They have mechanism to resolve conflicts, is either craft-gear conflicts or between different gear groups. For example, the rice paddy culture, which exists many years in Southeast and South Asia, and LMMA is an interesting example, and see the self-contained rules of seaweed collectors of Gulf of Northern India is another example. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Now I want to ask about collaboration. How can collaboration enhance small-scale fisheries communications? Vivienne?
Yes, thank you. I think sharing experiences is always a great thing to do. And I think that not only within fishers themselves, which has worked very, very good, at least in Mesoamerica, you know, having exchanges between knowledge systems of different marine territories of life, but also experiences from the supporters or the people who accompany small-scale fishers in their work. And for example, what Tero was saying about free previous informed consent, this is very important to have experiences to share about methodologies, especially and specifically considering the need of trust. You know, we need to have trust as a very important value to have adequate communication between human beings. And this is not a difference. It doesn't make a difference for the fishers. So I think we also need to potentiate the diversity of small-scale fishers in these exchanges. There has been a lot of discussion if we're talking about inland, coastal, marine fisheries, if we're talking about indigenous peoples, about Afro-descendants, about local communities. I think this diversity needs to be really potentiated. And if we share and we collaborate between ourselves, we are going to really find a way in which communication can be fluid within these different systems and this diversity. Thank you.
Tero, you just jump straight in, please.
Yeah, should I am probably on the line now. So maybe I can reflect on a story that happened last week. So there was a journalist that came into the boats. We are right at the tail end of our freshwater harvests. Got a beautiful 8-kilo pike on Monday. But there was a journalist who came and only went with the young team. So we have these 25 to 30-year-old fishers now that went through a master apprentice program. And one of those young fishers is a woman, Carolina, and the female journalist spent the day with her and in a way narrated a very unique story from Boreal Finland. A young professional fisher woman dedicated to the trade, learning it, and now mastering the seasonal round of how ice fishing, open water lake fishing, and so on happens, in addition to creating new products and so on and so on. And I guess the learned lesson here, which is my way of answering this question, is that spend time. Don't rush it. Don't think you know. I think in the world of SSF fisheries, there's nothing more than the unexpected. And it's also a level of trust. Most of the SSF fisheries I have met in my lifetime around the world tend to be shying away. There is an expectation that nobody will ever pay attention to us. We are always crushed over or left alone or whatever the case. So deeper you are able to engage in this kind of meaningful conversations and spending the time, winning the trust, and finally come back as a journalist, for example. Always come back. Don't make only one visit, but come back, show the draft story, build trust, and then I think you can win or have a really good way of enhancing it.
Yeah. Let me take a very different detour to answer this question. This question really poses a question as I support people or support organizations, what we are and what we can hope for and what we are in our actuality in terms of work with SSF communities or SSF organizations. Do you know what are the information needs of SSF communities, fish farmers, SSF fish workers, fish farmers, and fishing communities? If someone asks a question, what is the contribution of SSF to the world's SSF of the world's catch? How much they contribute to the animal protein requirements? For example, if they ask us, what is the level of overexploitation, which includes small-scale fisheries in the world? What is the level of depletion of resources? How many SSF communities are displaced from coastal areas? What is the level of pollution of SSF affected by? What is the level of environmental degradation SSF is operating in? Are we ready to enhance legal spaces for the operation of unions associations, and fisheries cooperatives of fishers at national and subnational level? This is a pertinent question to me. Have we assessed what are their training and capacity building needs? What is the range of fishing vessels that is reported as SSF vessels in illuminating hidden harbors? Can we develop a clearer understanding of the structure of SSF fishing fleet? Without the knowledge about the structural dimension of SSF, how can we collaborate? Because what is considered as SSF today, in terms of the statistical figures which are available and circulating as 90 million, 40 million, 50 million is, which includes a major contribution from trawlers, a major contribution from bottom trawling in their production. If we isolate the bottom trawling contribution from the small scale catch, the small scale catch will be much, much lower. For example, in India, 3.82 million fish catch. In that, 80% is coming from mechanized trawlers and gill netters and ring sealers, and 20% catches from small scale. I am sure this may be the case in many other parts of India. So what we are talking about small scale, we need to desacralize, we need to make it speak on the basis of a ground reality. That's it.
Thanks, everyone. Just a reminder to everyone in the call today, if you do have any questions, just pop them in the chat and we can come back to them at the end of the call. We will go through our own questions, but if anything else is on your mind, please just pop it in. Okay, now for the panel, how can we enhance small-scale fisheries representation in communications?
Well, thank you, Kate. I think they need to be part of all our decisions and all our fora and discussions. And having a small-scale fishers present has been a real challenge in the last discussions that we've had. We will put there as a picture. I think it can be done for you to see the discussion we had with young fishers in Honduras last week, and they were painting. They were painting their environment, the way they perceive their ecosystem. So I think we really need to be very innovative in how we approach the different sectors in small-scale fisheries and how we can promote them to communicate what they're thinking and what their environmental issues is considered. You can see it there. Thank you, Kate. And I think this spaces need to be really intensify in our work to be able to have that present. Thank you. Also, I think that we need to listen and back up. And I'm showing you a call of action. This call of action was presented in Lisbon by different fisher organizations from Latin America, Europe, Asia, Africa. And I think we really need to listen to what the small-scale fishers are saying, and we need to back up these initiatives. I also agree strongly with Tero that the generation of knowledge and bringing in the respect for this traditional knowledge of fisher needs to be coming clearly to enhance their representation. And we also need to do something very important from my point of view, and is recognize clearly that I'm speaking by an organization that works with fishers, but Tero is a fisher himself. So there's a difference here in the way we speak. And that is not necessarily bad. It's just that we need to make a clear difference between the two. And of course, when we're talking fisheries, I would recommend to ask Tero the question, because probably if I interpret that question, my answer is not going to be the answer of a small-scale fisher. And that difference between academic supporters and fishers themselves need to be a very clear division to enhance really the participation of small-scale fisheries in communications. Thank you.
Yeah, indeed, what to do. Well, I think one of the things we could say globally that is the fact that SSF fisheries are culture. Okay, they are not only economic activity. Therefore, in those cases where it applies, they should be protected as a artisanal or a special way of life. For example, I worked for about 5 years to get our winter seining. It's a form of very old way of fishing into the national list for UNESCO in Finland. Not yet to the World Heritage list, but we were able to convince the authorities to get it to a national level list. And this will give us rights, should we choose to do that, go forwards to the UNESCO World Heritage. The difficulty is that all of these are markers from outside. They are often soft or not so strong ways, and the one sentence answer to how to improve probably rests in my mind around the core idea of recognizing traditional knowledge or indigenous knowledge where applicable. Small-scale fishers know their ocean, they know their lakes, they have oral history, they have novel data, they have observations on marine plastics, climate, species decline or improvements or shifts. That's hugely and untapped. I know of places and communities where research institutes would pay millions of dollars or euros to know what the fishers are knowing. But we are also in this threshold of what do you share, because of the power that has been misused against the SSF fisheries. Mainly, of course, the trawling question comes to mind over and over and over again. The quota question in those parts where it has been very hard to register marine quota for the SSF fisheries. So the first things, and this is about communications, is trust building. If you are succeeding, then you get to a lot of things. There's nothing simple in any SSF fishery. It's all, and this we can say globally, it's all extremely complex, it's relevant, and it takes years to know it. And then the question in a way for this bracket is that what is the value? What is the value of the SSF knowledge? The women that are doing it and the men. And once we answer this question, we could find some solutions to the improvement. Thanks.
Yeah. So this question is very puzzle for me. What exactly do we mean by communication? Is it data, or is it information, or is it knowledge, or is it sending of messages, or is it about the process of dialogue? And communication, as we understand, as ICSF from 1984 onwards, is a two-way process. It requires a sender and a receiver to make an effort to ensure that the content is understood by both parties. All ICSF communication strategies, right from 1988 onwards, is built around this. That is why ICSF has translated many of its publications into prior to 2007 French and Spanish languages, and many of the Asian languages, including Working Fishing Convention, including summary of the guidelines, including guidelines main text. We translate many languages is to reach out to the unknown landscape called fish worker all the time. Thank you.
Thank you. I now want to ask about language, because what we say or what we don't say equally can have an impact on perceptions and messages and narratives around small-scale fisheries. So with that consideration in mind, how can we improve language around small-scale fisheries?
Thank you, Kate. This is a very interesting question, because I think the responsibility that we have from accompanying organizations to small-scale fisheries is really to inform ourselves well about the truth in the regions and territories, because sometimes it's not the truth, it's lie. You know, we have moments where organizations come to fishers and they end up criminalizing their activities because the communication is not transparent, is not talking the truth, and is not measuring the impacts of this wording or actions in the livelihoods of these communities. So I would strongly recommend, first of all, that we all read the small-scale voluntary guidelines for small-scale fisheries in the context of food security and poverty eradication. If we agree with the guidelines or not is something different, but small-scale fishery organizations have back up the language that it's there. So that is important, because then we are at least knowing what is a clear language that will not damage those organizations and groups. The other thing I would like to say is that we need to talk to fishers. We need to be humble. We need to listen and we need to ask. And that is lacking for most NGOs, governments, and other organizations that are approaching small-scale fisheries in the territories. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Kate. I think I have said a lot already that's quite, shall we say, passing both this and the previous question, but there is something that Vivienne said, which is that which I have found often in our part of the world, which is that, are we hearing the actual voice of the fisher, or are we hearing the interpretation by a journalist, by an academic? I also have a science training, so I have two hats, and I, as you by now have realized, I'm in a state of constant schizophrenia. But maybe here I would be very clear and say, can we enable the direct voice to be heard? As simple as that. Can we find platforms, mechanisms, events to have direct voices from the fishers to those in power, for example, managing fishing resources, researchers, and so on and so on. And I would bet, because I am sure this is the case, most of the people managing the resource in the field, for example, have not a great clue on the actual things that are embedded in the fishery. And then it becomes very fast, very conflict driven, because the traditional owners or the fishers are thinking they are in a defensive mode. First of all, their knowledge doesn't matter, their rights may have been taken away, and they have witnessed the decades-long decisions that essentially nobody listened to them in the first place. The researchers are uncomfortable most of the time. They have been trained in biology or ecological sciences, fish management, and they are proud of their knowledge. They have taken years in a university to come to a place where they think their knowledge matters. But nobody has ever trained them on cross-cultural communications or appreciation of traditional knowledge, or the fact that what are the silences of a fisherman? What are the silences of a fisherman? And when he speaks, it's an event. And those are the kind of cultural nuance that we should understand. And who will do that training? I don't know, but just, again, a practical example.
Yeah, we felt that this question of language is very paramount importance. We had a very interesting training of trainers workshop on 13, 14, and 15. Actually, I was trying to answer this question as the last question. And we conducted training of fish workers, which are middle-level leaders from 10 coastal states in India. And we allow the language interpretation for all the languages. And we found that with interpretation, they are able to follow quite a lot as far as they can, even to very specialized presentations on tenure, on fishery subsidies, on customary rights, on government schemes, on coastal land rights issues. But I feel that if ICSF has an opportunity and funds, we will translate into all the languages in the world, all our publications, not only to French and Spanish, not only to Indian coastal languages, to all the languages. And sorry, we don't have enough. We have a paucity of funds. We are a society which is very parsimonious about funds.
Thank you all. I want to move on to sort of the topic of diversity and making sure our communications are inclusive, because there is such, I mean, we know that small-scale fisheries are such a diverse and rich sector, and there's so many nuances from country to country and even within countries. So how do we kind of capture that diversity and make sure our communications are really inclusive? Vivienne?
Thank you, Kate. Well, the first problem we have is language, right? With this diversity, especially when we are thinking that some of the small-scale fisher groups also have not only Spanish or English, but their own language to express themselves. So this makes it very, very complicated. And we know that language is key and important for cultural resilience. So this is something that we need to think about. But I think even though we need to work all we can for participation of small-scale fishers at all levels. That means that's our fight. We need to bring them into the discussion. We bring to have them there to speak out about their diversity. But we also need to recognize that SSF is key and important for ocean conservation. And I think that's the start of really being inclusive. We really need those inputs to reach the goal of conserving and using sustainable the sea. I think we need to remember that SSF is a form of life, not only an economic asset. And in this sense, when you do that, then you start looking at women and youth and culture, that it's important to really be bringing in that diversity. I think that we need to fight very strongly for IPLCs to govern their own territories, marine territories. And this is something, for example, that we are seeing here in Mesoamerica very strongly. If that marine area is not protected from other industries, other actions, we would really not be able to maintain that diversity and then communicate about it. And then last but not least, I think we do not need to divide them, diversities. We need to unify them. We need to make SSF work together to be able to also work with other sectors. And this crosses through sustainable use. I think we should be really being strong that the resources of the sea can be used sustainably. And this is something that it is sometimes lost with big environmental NGOs that think that only preservation of those resources is going to save the ocean. No, sustainable use of the ocean where communities are involved is important, and diversity is linked to that. Thank you.
Yeah, Snowchange, the organization that's kind of the platform for a lot of northern fishing communities that we belong to, probably sits out in the world, and a lot of the Arctic and Boreal communities stand out for preserving their fishing as a food security issue, especially the indigenous communities. And this is, of course, linking them with the global south, like in India and other parts, Latin America. But the other side of the thing is that the Arctic, especially the Inuit, the Siberian communities, which are, of course, now because of the war, inaccessible, and Alaska, they are dependent on their fish and sometimes marine mammals for survival. The difficulty is that how do you convey the story of an Inupiaq fisher in Bering Sea that's harvesting a bowhead whale that will feed the whole village for a year? In fact, the Inupiaq, without speaking on their behalf, but I have worked with them and they are members. So in the past 20 years, often the words that we have heard is the fact that the whale will give itself to the people as long as there's a respectful relations with the marine mammal and the people. And this is a very special, in fact, a profound link between people and nature. And then you have a range of narratives that are generated from these remote communities, including the environmental movement, that will come in and say, oh, you are naughty, you are harvesting whales. Or then you get the regulators saying that you can only have half a whale a year or 1 ton of salmon a year. And Then comes the media, especially US media, with powerful corporate interests, no time, no interest, and so on and so on. And then you have it. You have a seal hunting ban, you have a quota on salmon, and this will lead to poverty, alcoholism, abuse, and lack of food security in the Arctic, especially for the indigenous peoples. So I don't have a good answer. The only way you can ensure things is that you build trust. You take time, especially in those parts of the world which are remote, as seen from Washington or Helsinki or Moscow. Who has time in today's world? Nobody, except the fishers have time. We have endless time, and that's where I leave it. Thanks.
Let me revert the question back to myself. How do we ensure? As a support organization, the first question coming to my mind is that as a support organization, have we done a detailed needs assessment of small-scale fisheries? What information is already available? And have we checked how this information is obtained? And have we checked whether this information is needed or not? And then the question is, how do we create a flow of information which is very multidirectional and which is very non-linear in the sense that not in an organized way from small-scale fishers? And we have to constantly refer back to and check the level of effectiveness of what we have collected as information from small-scale fishing communities. And secondly, we have to provide a context-specific information. This is, for example, when oil spill happens, how we can regulate pollution. That's a context-specific information we need to provide to CSF communities. And when the Fisheries Code of 1998 of Philippines started implementing, the municipalities would require information about how the fisheries management can take place. So it is the duty of the support organization to provide how the management can take place. And for example, India produced in 2006, 2010, and 2015 a marine fishery census, which is a very comprehensive data gathering of all craft and gear groups, as well as all fishers working in marine area. And then the next question is that how do we identify and fill information gaps related to small-scale fisheries? We have to consult CSF communities and identify what according to them are major gaps in information flow, and what are different formats and dissemination methods they would like to have. Then I think we ensure the diversity as well as more inclusiveness in our approach to them. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Arju has just put a question in there for Tero, so we'll just jump to that. Tero, Arju is asking about some communication materials that were produced by Snowchange, where the community itself put together compelling messages about ice fishing and intergenerational learning. Could you reflect briefly on how international NGOs in conservation and fisheries can amplify communications led by communities? This one's for Tero specifically.
Well, thanks, Arju, and thanks, Kate, for this question. Yeah, it's been a long day and a long year. I think the basic idea of how I think about this is that we are all alone at it. One of the weak points of a SSF fishery is that we are unfortunately most of the time in the periphery, far away in the coast or whatever the context, and there's not the muscle in the society to bring our messages forward. So the very short answer to this extremely important question that Arju is asking starts from the fact that we have to accept the fact that we need to create a network of like-minded, similar, and in the case where it's needed, gender-based women's organization in fisheries. That organization can then, such as the Low Impact Fishers of Europe, that can then communicate the key messages much better than every one of us being alone facing the trawling fleet, facing the quota, facing climate, or whatever the drivers of loss are. So it is true, we have, for example, in Snowchange, propagated our successes. To the success or not, it's hard to say, but at least we have tried. And the idea starts from the fact that you build a coalition. Now you have to maintain that coalition as well. It doesn't work only by getting an email from here and here and here. You need to build true trust. And the last thing I'll say is that most of the world's communications and science about fisheries happens completely without the actual fishers. You can even go to a conference on small-scale fisheries, and there are very few fishers in a conference. 95% of the participants are scientists. Oh well. So something is at miss, and why don't we establish a global ICSF network? Why not? It's one of the mechanisms to do that. And it will ensure that the voice of the women and men will be heard.
Thank you. Arju's popped another question, this time for Vivienne. So he's just commending Vivienne and CoopeSoliDar on the documentaries that they produce about community fisheries in Costa Rica and Mesoamerica. So Vivienne, can you just reflect on or share one or two insights about how you ensure that the fishers and community members trust the camera?
Thank you for that good question, Arju. I think that we have been talking about trust very much as a very important value in the discussion for communicating. And I think that the fishers are not there in a relationship for the video. There's a process behind, a process that sometimes has 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years of working together with these communities to be able to move on. So I think communication has to be part of a strategy of work with SSF. It cannot work alone. It's not a video, but it is a process where we have been supporting the fishers to be able to speak from their own feeling, from their own knowledge about the issues that are happening in their territory. And I think that's that's when we talk about responsibility of accompanying organizations, that's it. We need to accompany a process, not a video, not an interview, not a photo, but a process that really can change how we value the important work that they're doing. Thank you.
Great, thank you. There's a question now about financing. How do you overcome problems of financing to bring fishers together? I guess I might like to add to that. I always strive to get fishers and get their direct voice. I guess there's a tension though between knowing that this is, fishing is their way of life and you kind of don't want to take them away for their livelihood. So maybe I can add to this financing question just maybe a reflection on how we balance sort of the juggle between taking them away from their livelihood, but then giving them that opportunity and platform to speak. Vivienne, do you have thoughts on that?
Well, I have to say that this is a very unjust world, not only in how we are looking at human rights, but also in how financing is being provided. Most of the organizations of fishers and accompany organizations of fishers work as an alternative organizations with very, very few resources, counting those resources to be able to move. And there are organizations that have huge amounts of money that never reach those territories. So I think this is a very important question from Christina, what she's asking in the chat. And it's something that I think we need to put our finger on and say, really, how are we going to distribute resources if we are interested in promoting a different view with the small scale fishers? But I don't have the answer. And I would hope that things like this webinar and other issues that we can do moving forward would really touch on that spot.
Okay. Tero or Venu, did you have a response to that question?
Question. What we do is that we don't pretend that we work with fishermen. We as a support organization, we don't represent Fishworkers either. We do basically education and training work for them, or take up an issue for a campaign and action, or take up an issue for monitoring and research, or take up an issue for communication, an article or a film or whatever. And we allow them to speak on their own. We don't try to represent them through our words. We allow them to speak on their own, and that is most naked than any other representation model which cannot give you. And regarding finances, we provide per diem for all the meetings which we organize for Fishworkers. We provide a modest per diem. Of course, we would like to pay according to the standards at national level, something like say $15 in India, but we are able to pay only $6 in India when we invite them for a meeting. But our meetings were overwhelmed by their presence. We had 70 people from all Indian coastal states attended a 3-day workshop in India on 13, 14, and 15. We work with them, we support them, we provide a box of tools which they can pick up in their negotiations with whichever agencies they are working with, and we provide a kind of information which they can use it for analyzing, for taking it forward, for fighting, for whatever fights they do. That's it.
Well, if I say shortly, the mechanism by which we as an organization have solved it is that every 2 years we have a festival of northern fishing traditions that collects over 200 at max fishers around the Arctic and the North into different countries. And we then seek funding, grant funding to finance their time, travel, and efforts. There's plenty of grantee organizations out there. If you are credible in your work and you can pitch your action to them in a way that is significant. The other part of how to support them, we were lucky enough to be financially in a position to start 2 years ago on a small grants program. So we have been able to support our Pacific colleagues and Arctic fishing communities with small grants directly into the communities on their priorities. For example, we financed, and I'll stop here, but just to give you a practical example of how things are, we financed in Western Greenland fish traps, which are whale safe. Because some of the problems for the Inuit fishers in Western Greenland was that when they are harvesting the fish, the whales come and get trapped in the huge, big traps. So we found a way to support and finance in a very remote region, ecologically sustainable small grant that helps our brothers and sisters in Attu and Aasiat. Thanks.
Thank you. Now, people have to leave, and of course we had so many more questions. I guess I wanted to give everyone the chance to just have a final thought or final reflection. Maybe if everyone could just share 1 or 2 final thoughts on what really needs to happen in this space. What's the key takeaway message that you want to leave with everyone today? Vivienne?
Yes, Kate, I think communication needs to be done with respect, as Tero was saying, always with free prior informed consent. It needs to be done with recognition. That means always citing, the knowledge and the efforts that fishers do, with total participation in the idea, from the color that it's used to the message that it's going to be printed. And never, ever, ever substitute the words of a fisher, putting yourself or you as the one who said it. So I am very pleased to have shared with you, Tero, Venu, Kate, and all the assistants, the information, and let's keep going. Thank you.
I thank the organizers and my colleague Vivienne and Venu. It seems we appear often on these with Vivienne, which is of course wonderful. You could get another person from Snowchange as well, but the one line ending would be that if you want the women to come back to the villages as fishers, or the young men, it has to be profitable, safe, and you have to have positive niche for this to happen. Otherwise, fishing communities will face immense loss and defeat, as they are already witnessing.
It's very simple. Let us declare 21st century as the century of small-scale fisheries, and let us celebrate it. And let us provide the maximum tools to epistemological discernings which needed to be done for enhancing the profile of small-scale fisheries worldwide. And let us work as a collective to support that. And let us tell small-scale fishers that things are not as dangerous as they appear to be. Things can be changed. And our duty as supporters is to desacralize what is sacralized in front of us. Thank you all.
Thank you all so much. All right, well, that brings us to the end of today. Like I said, we could keep going for so long. If you want to do something more after today's session, of course, there is the good practice guide, which I've shared the link. I'll do that again. Go and have a look and a read. It's got some really useful tips in there, but also take the next step and really commit to it personally and as an organisation and become a champion for the guide's principles. There is also a listserv group if you want to continue to be part of the conversation. It's an easy, informal way to share information. So just search for that on Google Groups. And finally, not everyone could join this session today. There is a repeat session, same questions, just different speakers, happening tomorrow to account for people in other time zones. So if you invite your colleagues to go along. Finally, thank you to our speakers for everyone showing up. This is such an important topic. I'm so glad we can continue to have this conversation, and I hope it will really roll on and we'll start seeing this progress in making sure our communications are ethical and really inclusive. So thank you all.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks. Bye. All right. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.